Live from the Indiana University Auditorium in Bloomington, the Indiana Debate Commission presents the third and final debate in the race for Governor of Indiana.
Good evening. I'm Michael McRobbie, President of Indiana University. On behalf of IU's faculty, staff and students, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our Bloomington campus for this important event in our state's democratic process. Tonight's debate continues the long tradition of civic engagement we have nurtured here, and we are honored that all three candidates for governor could join us this evening. Again, welcome to Indiana University. Tonight's moderator is Tom Cochran.
Thank you, and good evening. We began with a word of explanation. The meeting of the candidates this evening is a conversation format. We want to explore the area of vision, judgment, decision-making, and character. So much of the governor's work is reacting and responding. Being governor does not mean being the captain of your destiny. We hope to use this time then to draw a measure of these candidates as individuals. Why do they think, act, and believe as they do? And how will that influence their performance as governor? Each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond. If I think a candidate has not answered a question or has waffled, I will redirect the question. I will also determine if there is a need for rebuttal. And each candidate will have time for a final statement. And I would remind the audience here at Indiana University to obey the behavior guidelines explained to you a few minutes ago. We don't want to embarrass you on statewide television by escorting you out of the hall. The questions will be answered in a rotation, beginning with Andy Horning, Mitch Daniels, Jill Long Thompson. The second round moves to Mitch Daniels, Jill Long Thompson, Andy Horning, and so we move around the table. So Andy, you answer our first question. What is it about you, the person that you are, that makes you want this job of governor? And in answering, why take on the enormity of it?
Well, you know, that is kind of that's a pivotal question. But unfortunately, I think it has more to do with voters than it does with any individual candidate in one sense. And that is, we have to choose, you know, sort of the direction of the nation and the state and the localities based on ideology. I think what I should do is opposed to just say who I am as a person, which I'll certainly do that. I think we need to understand that ideology does matter. And my ideology has come from my faith, my background, my perceptions of the world. But I think my ideology is what makes me something special. I've read the constitutions. I found them to be astonishing documents. I've found them to be not only the law, but functional for, you know, generations of Americans who fought and died for those things. And in terms of what I think is important about me is that I am not anybody special. I am not born to any sort of privilege. I have not been raised with money or power. And in fact, my perception of the world is shaped by the fact that mostly I've been fighting politics as opposed to being a politician myself. So I think that in terms of, you know, whether I'm a regular guy or not, I'd have to say that I'm probably not. Most of us haven't read the constitutions. I had some things happen in my life that forced me to sort of reevaluate what the common perception of government and you know, politics is all about. And that's a little unusual. And I think that in driving me to the Constitution, I have to say that I've had some extraordinary circumstances. And those are what kind of define me as a person.
Andy, thank you. Mitch, would you like a restate of the question?
Please.
What is it about you, the person, that makes you want this job? Why take on the enormity of it?
No one was more surprised than I when I ran for political office in the first place. Nothing I'd ever expected to do, nothing I'd sat around thinking about or planning. I finally became restless at seeing the state I love, as I saw it, slipping behind, sinking in various ways, and a government that I thought was not serving its citizens as well as it could. And that, coupled with the appeal of a number of people who approached me with the idea, persuaded me to try something, which, as I said, really had never been in my contemplation. My view is that politics is not the center of life, and I'm somewhat honestly skeptical of folks who view it that way. I think that government, government service, when performed well, is what we do to make the rest of life, the important part of life, work better. Family and work, and the voluntary associations of our country. And so I would simply say that I do feel, as someone on whom life has smiled, who has had the opportunity to do a lot of things and been blessed in so many ways, that I feel an obligation that I'm sure all the candidates here would share. But I would simply leave it at that I saw a need and an opportunity to serve. It's not about me, never was. It's about our state and how we might make it the great state it ought to be.
Thank you. Would you like a restate of the question, Jill?
No, thank you, and thank you for the question. This race is not about me. It's not about any one of us. It's about the future of the state of Indiana. And I want to thank the Indiana Debate Commission as well as Indiana University, my alma mater, for hosting this debate. And I think probably what inspires me to serve in public office is, as you know, I grew up on a farm in the northern part of the state in the United Methodist Church. I'm the first in my family to go to college and was very fortunate and very privileged to come here to Indiana University to earn an MBA and a PhD in business from the Kelley School. I had never thought I would run for public office. It wasn't a particular interest of mine, but in the late 1970s, when I was working on my doctorate, we were experiencing double-digit inflation and a recession, and I would listen to politicians talk about the economy, and I realized that I knew more about the economy than many of them, and that it occurred to me that maybe the reason God had given me this path to follow was that I was to be involved in politics and public service. And the state of Indiana desperately needs new leadership that will take us in a new direction. We've lost 64,000 jobs since last year. Since Governor Daniels has taken office, the unemployment rate has jumped 2 full percentage points. Hoosiers now make 87 cents on the dollar relative to the rest of the country. We have one of the highest home mortgage foreclosure rates in the country. I have a plan, and much of it comes from my background here at Indiana University, as well as from my background as Undersecretary for Rural Development at the United States Department of Agriculture.
We've reached our time limit, and I will be a good sergeant of arms, time cop. Mitch, this second question goes to you first. Who or what has been the single most important influence in your life?
Dick Lugar, led only by my father and mother. It was one of many lucky breaks that I fell into association with him as a young person. He is a paragon of public service, the whole package, intellect, work ethic, uncompromising integrity, and he's been a pole star for me in many ways. Again, I never expected, ever, to be in elected office myself. But I saw in him certainly a person that one could admire whatever walk of life one has chosen. So I would cite him. I've been very lucky to serve under, in business and elsewhere, some tremendous leaders. And if you simply keep your ears open, you learn from everyone with whom you have the privilege to work. But you ask for one, and I can't do better than to name our senator and my friend.
Thank you. Jill, would you like a restate of the question?
Well, I couldn't narrow it down to one person, and it really is my family, starting with my parents and my 2 brothers who have had a tremendous influence on me, but also my husband, whom I've been very blessed to be married to for the last 13 years. And I think probably the influence that has been most significant is the value of hard work and integrity and working to make a difference. The world is not about me, it's about what I can give to my community. And while my husband and my immediate family have been probably most significant in influencing my life, there is a particular individual that's not very well known who probably sums up what is my philosophy coming from the family that I grew up in. The gentleman's name is Al Haynes, and he is a retired United Airlines pilot, and he found himself flying a wide-body DC-10 across country, lost an engine and all the hydraulics, and there was no procedure to follow for that particular situation, but he recalled something a flight instructor had told him many years before, which is never give up, and he didn't give up, and using his own innovation and courage, he landed that plane in Sioux City, Iowa, and saved almost 200 lives that day. And I think this notion of never giving up and continuing to fight is central to who we are as Hoosiers, who we are as Americans. And every day on the campaign trail, I run into families that are concerned about their future, and they don't give up either.
We've reached the time limit. I would just remind the candidates that they have been very kind to put a little clock right in front of you that backs down so you can glance at it and see where you are in terms of your minute-and-a-half response. Andy, would you like a restate of the question?
No, I think I've got it. And I guess in the positive sense, there are a lot of people I could point to and say that these were positive inspirations. But in the context of a political discussion, I guess I'd have to say the most influential person in my life was the first president I really paid attention to, as that was Richard Nixon. And when he said, you know, if the president does it, it must be legal. That was just a frightening thing for me to hear. When I was seeing what this fellow was going through later with the Watergate business and understanding the sort of the enormity of power that we put into human hands and the ability to get away with so much corruption for so long, and then the arrogance of some people to say that, you know, if the president does it, it's okay, or, you know, call the Constitution just a piece of paper. This was a pivotal moment for me. I have to say that you know, as a young kid, I tend towards liberal, like a lot of kids do. And when I understood exactly what could happen when you shovel too much power into too few hands, and when you understand that, you know, the history of humanity is really rife with examples of bad things happening with government power, that was, you know, for a teenage kid like I was, that was a very powerful thing. And I will not soon forget all of the examples I have seen since that, you know, where I've seen lots of cases where people get too much power and the things that happen with that can be disastrous.
Andy, thank you. Jill, you answer our third question first. On a scale of 1 to 10, rate the competence of the Indiana legislative process and the legislature itself. What would you like to see changed about it?
Well, I think it might be difficult to come up with a single number because you have quite a variety of competence levels among the legislators. But as I have said before, I think we do need some reforms here in the state of Indiana regarding ethics and regarding how the process works. Not to suggest that we have legislators who are not ethical, that's not my suggestion at all, but that we could have a better system in which to operate. As you may know, I was the first member of Congress in recent history to introduce ethics reform legislation for the United States Congress. And my legislation, which ultimately became law in a slightly different form, bans members of Congress from receiving gifts. And I also think that in addition to ethics reform, that we need to have campaign finance reform. Indiana is a very rare state in that individuals and political action committees are allowed to give unlimited amounts to political campaigns, and corporations are able to contribute up to $5,000, very different from federal law. And I think that while the legislators do an amazing job within the system, I think we need reform both in the executive branch as well as in the legislative branch.
Jill, I'm not going to let you off the hook. On a scale of 1 to 10, come up with an aggregate number for the Indiana legislature.
Oh, I would say probably an 8 or a 9, given the challenges that they face, and I know they work very hard. So I would say an 8 or 9.
All right. Andy, would you like a restate of the question? On a scale of 1 to 10, rate the competence of the legislative process and the legislature itself. What would you like to see changed about it?
Well, I'd have to say that in intent, probably a 9, but in execution, probably a 1. And the reason for that is because every politician in the state of Indiana, every police officer swears an oath to the Constitution of Indiana, and I don't know very many who have actually read it. And that is a problem. You know, just in terms of where we have gone, Voters have chosen this, and I'm not blaming the individual politicians necessarily, but there are laws that they're supposed to obey. And when people call me a constitutionalist, what that really means is that other people are not constitutionalists, they're anti-constitutionalists. And that is a serious problem. And that's one where, it transcends ethics. There can be some very fine people who just decide to toss the Constitution aside and do whatever they want anyway. But that's a dangerous thing to do, and if there's any kind of reform that I would like to see happen, is that we would just get out our copies of the Constitution. You can find it at horningforgovernor.com, by the way. It's my platform. And if you just read the thing, you should get pretty angry, because there's an awful lot of stuff in our Constitution that is being violated every day, and that's costing us tremendously.
Mitch, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate the competence of the Indiana legislative process and the legislature itself. What would you like to see changed about it?
Tom, I'm going to say 7.628. I would rate the performance pretty good. I would attest to the fact that legislators, and we've all poked fun, and we've all perhaps been cynical from time to time, but these folks are working very hard, often away from their true life's professions. I'm glad we have a citizen legislature, by the way, not a legislature of full-timers that wants to meet year-round. If Andy thinks we have problems now, look at the states that have that system. And our folks do go back and live under the laws they've passed, and that's something I like about the system. If you look at the last 4 years, you will see that despite the inevitable and quite natural scraps that go on, some tremendous bipartisan achievements have happened. The last 4 legislatures have been, in terms of action and activity, the busiest and most historic in the memory of living Hoosiers. And most of that only happened because people did reach across the lines. We've had balanced budgets consecutively now that put this state back in strong shape. Took Republicans and Democrats to do that. The program for the uninsured that we have could only have been passed really with the leadership of people in the other party. And so I want to, the property tax reforms of this year likewise. So I would give them pretty good grades, and they deserve them.
We've reached our time. I would like to thank the 3 of you for minding the clock well. We would not want to end up as a Saturday Night Live bit, as we have seen before, so thank you. Please keep looking at the clock. Andy, the next question goes to you as the first response. What role, what value do arts and culture play in the quality of life of the state? Where does it stand in the list of priorities and needs, and how and where do you get the funding?
Well, there you go. Getting the funding that's a two-edged sword. If you look at all of human history and you see how often it's been the case that arts can be used for propaganda as well as for revolution, you see there's a danger with political funding of the arts. And while I am not talking about cutting funding of the arts and in terms of education in schools, I think that we've done too much of that already. I believe that music and art are extremely important for developing a discerning mind. And as educational priorities, they are very high. But when it comes to funding the arts, we've been looking at only like 10% of funding coming from government sources anyway in many cases. And I think that we can do without that 10%, if for no other reason that sometimes that subsidized art is not commercially viable because nobody wants it. And second of all, the tendency for political subsidy of art has been to be used as propaganda. And I just would like to just cut that entirely, make no possibility for political funding of something that should be more revolutionary and more, I would rather see more skepticism about government, as you might kind of expect of me. But in terms of arts funding, I have to say that I would cut a lot of funding, and arts would be among that in terms of the professional arts world.
Mitch, what role and value do arts and culture play in the quality of life of the state? Where does it stand on the list of priorities and needs, and how and where do you get the funding?
Throughout human history, art has lifted the spirit, called mankind to its highest instincts. I can say it's probably never been more important than now. I think there's been a coarsening in our culture, a degrading in some cases of what we think of as art, and so supporting the very best and finest of the arts is essential in the role that it's always played. There's a new dimension, and that's the economic dimension. We live in a world of infinitely portable capital and businesses in which the terms of competition, which of course include keeping costs down, taxes down, regulation reasonable, infrastructure built, all these things we do, but also we must have the most livable communities. Places, and Bloomington's a great example, that people will choose because of the amenities that make them attractive places to live, and the arts are very high in that respect. I agree with Andy completely. Making certain our young people have an appreciation for the arts that might not otherwise be there in today's culture, I think is really important. Now, in terms of direct funding, I support it through the schools. I support specifically those things we do. We have a governor's commission to uplift the arts, keep them in front of the public, celebrate the best among us. In difficult times, direct subsidy of the arts by people who may be very low income, I have to tell you honestly, is not at the top of my list.
At the end of the time there. Jill, what role, what value do arts and culture play in the quality of life of the state? Where does it stand on the list of priorities and needs, and how and where do you find the funding?
Well, for me, this is a particularly interesting question in this venue because my one brother is a graduate of the theater program here at Indiana University, and I've been privileged to sit in this audience and watch a number of performances ranging from Seals and Crofts to the Nutcracker Ballet. And I do believe that the arts and culture are very important to our society. I also think that children who have a gift in the arts should have the same kinds of support to fulfill their potential as children who are good in math and science or in athletics or whatever their individual talent might be. I think that arts and culture should very definitely continue to be a part of our education programs here, but I also think that arts and culture are critical to economic development. When businesses are looking for places to locate, they assess the arts and cultural environment of various communities that they are considering. Finding the funding is the challenge, and I believe the way to not only make it a priority but to fund it is to grow the economy. We need new leadership. We've been losing too many jobs. Hoosiers make 87 cents on the dollar relative to workers in other states. We have to turn this economy around, and that's why I'm running for governor, and I am running to bring change to Indiana that will expand our economic base, grow our economy, and make it possible for us to fund programs that are very, very important to the future well-being of our citizenry.
This is an important question to many in the state. Would any of you like a final comment in rebuttal to something that was said by either of the other candidates? Okay, we'll move on. Mitch, this first question goes to you. Who or what has been the biggest defeat, loss, or setback in your life, and how did it shape your life?
I made a big mistake when I was in college, and I spent a night in jail. And I paid the price for that, but it was the smallest price I paid. In the sense of the fine and the embarrassment at the time. The most severe price I paid was facing my father, who I believe I had rarely let down before, and I never got over that. And then for a long time, I faced the prospect of telling people about this event, volunteering the information. I made that a practice. I got the first real job I ever had, and I didn't know this at the time, only because I volunteered the truth. The employer imposed a test knowing about this and told his staff that if he would make a joke about running afoul of the law, and if I said nothing, then they didn't want me. But if I came forward and volunteered it, then they would take a chance and hire me. A lot of good opportunities came from that. So I would say that the single worst mistake I made turned into a positive lesson about telling the truth, being upfront, acknowledging your errors, and trying never to repeat them and to be a better person because of it.
Thank you. Jill, what has been the biggest defeat, loss, or setback in your life, and how did it shape you?
I think the biggest setback or loss in my life was during the 1980s, during the farm crisis, when my own family almost lost the family farm. And I can recall so vividly how my father had gotten up early every morning to milk cows. We never took a vacation. My mother worked extremely hard. And even with all of that hard work, because of falling commodity prices and increased interest rates, we really thought we might not be able to hang on to a farm that had been in our family for some time. My family worked through it, through hard work and some upturn in the economy, but it has made me extremely sensitive to the overall economic well-being, not just of our country and our state, but of the world. And that's why I'm running for governor. Indiana has seen quite a downturn over the last 4 years. Governor Daniels would like everybody to believe, I guess, that everything is going just fine and it's part of a national trend economically. Well, he was George Bush's budget director, one of his top economic advisors, and so he has to take some responsibility for what's happening nationally as well. He's the architect of the largest deficit in the history of the world. I take economics very seriously because I know how it can impact individual families and lives, and that's why I'm running for governor, to regrow our economy.
You wandered a bit from the direct question. Mitch Daniels, do you want a moment of response?
Well, you know, where's Sergeant Friday when we need him? You know, the facts, ma'am, just the facts. No, unemployment's not gone up 2 points, barely a half a point. You're going to be very disappointed, I suppose, when the next numbers come out and you find it went down in Indiana last month. It's dramatically lower than every state around us. Our economy has added tens of thousands of jobs the last few years. In every ranking of business attractiveness, which is what the state has the most opportunity to affect, we've come rocketing up the list to the top tier. Indiana's alone in the Midwest and really outside the Sun Belt now by every measure of appeal to jobs and growth and opportunity. So let's all agree that one person without a job is too many, that we've got a long way to come back after decades of decline, but let's try not to misrepresent the facts as you've done now for the third straight time.
I think you rebutted as long as you wandered.
You didn't tell me how long.
Okay.
May I rebut?
In 15 seconds.
The fact is we've lost 64,000 jobs since last year. The unemployment rate has gone up under Governor Daniels' administration. We do need to take the state in a different direction.
Andy, we can add some time to your response if you would wish.
My mistakes are not nearly as interesting as this.
What has been the single largest setback, defeat, or loss in your life, and how did it shape you?
Well, you know, that's a serious question, and I have to say that the first 30 years of my life or so, if people actually do learn from mistakes, I'd have to be a genius by then, because I screwed up a lot of things, and some of them were on a deeply personal, family level that. I was a different person when I was 30 than I was when I was 31, and I came to Christ when I was 31 because I was basically an idiot until then. And if anybody wants to know the details, I'll put them up on my website at horningforgovernor.com. It'll be underneath the Constitution there. Okay. Anyway, I have to say that I have changed a lot, and I learned a lot, and I'm a different kind of a person than I was when I was younger. And that is important to understand who I am now, because it was very pivotal in changing me and my view of the world and view of government.
Well, this is a very good transition. Jill, this is your question to respond to. First, do you have an ethical, moral, or spiritual code, and how do you integrate it into your work in public service and in politics?
Well, of course I have a moral, a spiritual, and an ethical code, and it has largely been influenced by my upbringing in the United Methodist Church. First the Methodist Church, and then we joined with the United Brethren, and now I'm a United Methodist. And I think that because of that particular upbringing, it's relatively clear to me what's right and wrong. I've even taught an ethics course or two along the way. And I think that what is important for public servants is to recognize that just because something might be legal or just because something might be within the code of ethics, that doesn't mean that it is the most ethical behavior. For example, when I served in the United States Congress, it was within the code of ethics for members of Congress to accept meals and coffee and soft drinks and such from the lobbying community, but I chose not ever to do that. When I was a member of Congress, the Congress voted to raise its own pay. I voted against it, and I also gave that pay back because I thought there was an inherent conflict of interest in voting for a pay increase that was going to directly impact my pocketbook. I think that the public has become very cynical because we have seen across the country and around the world politicians that have not put in place strong codes of ethics, but I think it's very important.
Thank you. Andy?
Well, as I alluded to before, my faith is pretty pivotal to what I believe. Now, it's not that I'm one of the Bible-thumping sorts who are going to try to ram it down your throat, because I'm not good at that. But if I were to say what my principles are, it would have to be along the line of, in God we trust, and in politicians we do not. And, I think of several cases where, my former life, I would have thought of politicians as sort of an idol, where, we think of them as something other than human, and we often don't really want to know all that much about, politicians. We like to be able to put them up on a pedestal, but I've never been able to do that since Nixon. And what I've seen instead is something that I believe very strongly in the idea of sin, and that people do make terrible mistakes. In fact, I've seen the way y'all drive. I know that there is, in all of us, there is a potential to err, and that's something that happens in politics as well. We like to think we put people in positions of power because they're better than we are.
Well, how do you integrate it into your work in politics and public service?
Well, I don't really make any separation of that. I want people to understand that I'm not running for a legislative job. I'm running for an executive job, and I believe very strongly in executing the laws as written. And that follows along with everything else I believe in. I don't believe in redefining the meaning of the word is. There are some things in the Constitution I wish were not there, but I believe in the whole Constitution, both federal and state. And
Andy, thank you. Mitch?
I was lucky, like so many, to grow up at a time and in a family where codes of conduct and good character were all around us. And it's really hard for me to separate them out, what lessons my dad taught or a scoutmaster taught, or the teachers at public school for that matter. But to answer you directly, the faith I grew up in is one that I will simply say the ethical and moral side of it, I believe, has never been more needed in our world. In the Christian faith, we are taught humility, to doubt oneself, not to place oneself ahead of other people, to serve other people. And while that to me is the central instruction of our faith, one that I hope one day to fully measure up to, it is the gentlest faith, and I'm glad I was taught that. We are taught, where I go on Sunday, we are taught forgiveness. And you ask how I integrate this with my public life. I feel very profoundly, I've said this many times, the responsibility to keep these things separate. We serve whoever is chosen in 3 weeks. We'll serve equally people of every faith and no faith. That's very important. But in terms of the way I approach it, I do believe in, I pray, when I pray, it's for guidance and patience and the ability to forgive, even if I do feel I've been wronged, and I think those serve me well.
Thank you. Andy, this next question goes to you first. Do you think Hoosiers are content with the mediocrity that is reflected in measures of educational standards, health, clean air, city livability? If not, why do we have that reputation?
I think there's a logical disconnect between the way we think and the way we vote. I think that we've been voting as if we're very happy with everything that's going on in our government. I think that when you ask people, they say they're not. But, I guess I would challenge the idea that we have no problems in this country that we haven't chosen ourselves over and over and over again. We vote for all of our problems. And so, in terms of what people say about things, I almost don't care, because what's really important is what you do with your vote. And in my way of looking at it, we've been throwing away votes for 100 years and pushing ourselves towards a morality that none of us believe in, towards a kind of government that none of us believe in, towards a two-party system that never existed anywhere. And all of this is, a big disconnect in terms of action versus belief.
Mitch, would you like a restate of the question? Do you think Hoosiers are content with the mediocrity that is reflected in measures of educational standards, health, clean air, and city livability? If not, why do we have that reputation?
Tom, some are, but I think fewer than before, and I think to some extent it's the central question facing us as the citizens of this state in this time in which we live. It is precisely because some of us were so discontented with the progress of our state in the areas you mentioned and many others that we formed up and offered ourselves as people of change 4 years ago and have brought a ton of it. And I will tell you that I think I see measures, objective and subjective, that say that if there was a time when too many Hoosiers were resigned or content to be less than excellent, it is first of all, it must end in the interest of our kids, and secondly, that it is ending. There's a passion now, I believe, for change in this state, and an enthusiasm and an optimism that at long last we have taken charge of our problems and are beginning to try new things and have taken bold action in the last few years, the kind we didn't used to take in Indiana. If you read the histories of our state, there is a constant theme, whatever else they say that these people called Hoosiers are resistant to change and just let others go first. We can't, that is not a formula for success in this world, and we have appealed now for 5 years to our fellow citizens to rise up and help us move decisively to, and never to settle, never for mediocrity in those 4 measures or any other.
Thank you. Jill?
Well, sitting here in this beautiful auditorium on the campus of Indiana University, I think it's very clear that Hoosiers don't settle for mediocrity. And a number of years ago, I had an opportunity to travel in Kenya and Nigeria and South Africa as part of the Food for Education initiative. And I ran into more PhDs from Purdue University than you would ever run into on the street in downtown Indianapolis. And I think that's another reflection of how we don't settle for mediocrity here. And I think that's why voters are looking for change this year. They want real change, not just tinkering around the edges, and not change that takes us in the wrong direction, but they want real change that will help us to grow this economy, increase our high school graduation rate, bring healthcare costs down, and they also want the privatization stopped because they know that we're not mediocre, that we can in fact manage these programs ourselves, and that every time we enter into a contract with an out-of-state contractor or a foreign contractor, we're sending dollars outside the state of Indiana. I think Hoosiers have made it very clear this year, as we have oftentimes in the past, that we're not mediocre and we don't settle for mediocrity here. That's why Hoosiers want change.
Jill, thank you. Mitch, this first response goes to you. How can Indiana continue to provide current services at escalating costs and/or new services without increasing revenue? Are political leaders afraid of leveling with taxpayers about the need to raise revenue and maybe raise taxes?
No. You know, we found a state bankrupt 4 years ago when times were good, by the way, economically, and most states were flush with cash. And we balanced the books of this state, the budget of this state, without a tax increase. And we paid back the schools, and we paid back the universities like IU, and we paid back the cities and towns the old-fashioned way. We had the tightest budget in 55 years. We met every important service. We increased funding, for instance, on education. We doubled the number of child protection workers and transformed the worst system in America into one of the best. We have undertaken many reforms. My opponent wants to reverse them all, but that would penalize taxpayers. She would overcharge taxpayers tens of millions of dollars so that we could have, once again, a big and bloated government. Instead of hiring Hoosiers in the private sector, which we have chosen to do when it made good sense. So, you know, as we sit here tonight, 2/3 of the states of this country are in desperate financial shape, and they are cutting vital services and raising taxes, if you can imagine such a thing in a tough economy like this. We are not in that shape. We're in the reverse. We are meeting fundamental obligations. We have money in reserve against the rainy day which has begun, and we will continue to do those things necessary to prioritize and to deliver services while keeping taxes down on people who are, you know, strapped to meet the bills that we have right now.
Thank you. Jill? How can Indiana continue to provide current services at escalating cost and/or new services without increasing revenue? Are political leaders afraid of leveling with taxpayers about the need to raise revenue or taxes?
Well, I don't think there is a need to raise taxes, and contrary to what Governor Daniels would have you believe, I have a very clear record on taxes. As a member of Congress, I voted against all new taxes and tax increases. Any piece of legislation that had a new tax or a tax increase in it, I voted against it. That contrasts with his record of having raised the cigarette tax, having raised the sales tax, property taxes by $1 billion. He tried to raise the state income tax, but the legislature stopped him. In order for us to have the resources we need, instead of raising taxes, we need to grow the economy, but we also need to stop this privatization. Now, the governor likes to talk about how we're going to manage the resources, but in fact, not only has he privatized, and in the toll road, for example, he has invested almost 1/3 of the money that came in from that contract in junk bonds, in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Very high risk and unacceptable. Not only that, he doesn't even have an investment policy for those funds. Completely unprecedented in the state. We have to have, at the highest level in this state, a leader who will manage dollars well, who knows how to grow the economy, someone who will bring real change that takes us in the right direction. That's why I'm running for governor.
Andy, we're going to allot some additional time to you because, Governor, we're going to allow you a 30-second response.
Right now?
Yes.
Well, you know, I thought eventually we might see a kinder, gentler you, but I guess it's not in the cards. First of all, the treasurer of the state, separately elected, invests the funds. They are invested under conditions of total security. The federal government just took over Fannie Mae's obligations, as you know. They are rock solid, and we're earning lots of interest on them. No, taxes have gone down, the biggest tax cut in state history. Every penny of the sales tax increase was returned to property taxpayers, plus 72 cents for every dollar. It's the biggest tax cut in state history. We've been over this multiple times now. And so 30 seconds, not nearly enough time to correct 10 or 12 misstatements. I picked those two.
Jill?
And I would also like to respond.
15 seconds.
Because going back to our taxpayers to make secure Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is robbing Peter to pay Peter. And this is not a good policy. We need an investment policy for those dollars. He does not have it, and it is putting those dollars at risk.
Thank you. Andy, you can have 2 minutes to answer this question, if you would like.
If any of you remember when I ran for governor in 2000, I was talking about cutting the state budget by 7% per year because I was afraid of what was going to be happening in about 10 years. Now, I was a little bit off my schedule, and I hope I'm really wrong about what's coming next. I really do. But I think we need to prepare. And I was, in fact, when I say I hope I'm wrong, I really, there's nothing more I'd like to see than that I'm just really wrong about what's coming. Because I think we have to cut a lot. I think it's no longer the case that we can afford the luxury of a parasitic government where we're putting 60% of everything, gross domestic product, into all levels of government. And when I was talking about cutting things in 2000, I was also talking about cutting property tax. I was talking about cutting it by 50%. I haven't changed any of my tune in this stuff, and some of it would have to kind of sound like I told you so, but I suppose a candidate's supposed to do that to a degree. I really have been right. I suppose it's possible I could be wrong at any time now. But, you know, I have to say that there are some people who have been warning us about what's coming for like 30 years at least. There's a fellow, F.A. Hayek, who won a Nobel Prize describing what's coming next in 1932. We have problems that are well documented, well known, and we have to prepare. The responsible thing to do would be to cut government dramatically, let people control more of their own finances, get on a sound monetary policy, which is all in our Constitution, by the way. We're supposed to have a metal-backed currency. And the fact that we don't, we have a fiat currency that's, that's basically running like monopoly money right now, means that what's happened in the last couple of weeks has been dramatic theft. The value of your dollar is going to go down, the value of your holdings is going to go down, the price of everything is going to go up, and we need to prepare for what's going to happen next. So I'm going to say that no, we can't keep the same level of services from government. We have to seek other sources of those services, and I think we can do better.
Okay. Thank you. We have time for 1 full minute-and-a-half response and then perhaps a truncated question before you move to your final statements, and there may be some leveling of the table that you want to do at that time. Jill, the first question to you. At its most complex and at its most simple, fundamentally, what is the role of government?
Well, I think the role of government is to, in a democratic society like we have, is to provide for a strong national defense, and that includes public safety at the state level. I think it is to ensure that the policies that you put in place provide for a strong economy, because a strong economy is tied to a strong national defense. I think that education is tied to a strong national defense, ensuring that our young people have the opportunity to fulfill their potential. And finally, I believe that energy independence is critical to a strong national defense. So when you talk about what the role of government is, whether it's federal or state, it really, I think, can be summarized in that whole mission of providing for the safety and security of our citizenry. To do that requires a number of things in addition to a strong military. And I do believe that the more decentralized government is, the better it functions, which is why I have some disagreements with some of the recommendations from the Governor's Kernan-Shepard Commission report, because I think that the more you engage the local citizenry, I think the better the policies will be. I also, because I come from a rural county, think that one size does not fit all. But I believe that the number one priority is security and strong national defense.
Andy?
Well, the legal role of our government is well defined by the constitutions, and there really isn't any shortcut. You just have to read them. It doesn't take long to read the federal constitution, maybe a half hour. It takes maybe an hour and a half to read the state constitution. If you read these things, you're going to see what the legal role of government is. And what it used to be believed in this country until fairly recently, when we've decided the role of government is everything. The role of government is really supposed to be just to protect your rights, your property, your body from those who would do you harm. Not to protect you from yourself, not to protect you from trans fats or cigarettes, and it's not to protect you from, some specters that we create overseas, hobgoblins that we're always working up to give more power to politicians. What government is supposed to be is like a junkyard dog, and you keep it in the junkyard. And the thing that's important to understand is all of this has been written down already. And all we have to do is just look at what the smartest people in history have written down and then just do it. I got to tell you, it's not that often that really smart people go into politics. We had that a couple hundred years ago, and we should not throw that out. The constitutions of the United States and Indiana are precious documents. These are things that would work. And if you actually read through them, first of all, get mad, so prepare, sit down, get yourself ready. You should get mad. But then second of all, you should just insist upon this. No matter who wins up here, you should insist upon the law, because nothing else restrains politicians.
Thank you, Andy. Mitch, at its most simple and its most complex, what is the fundamental role of government?
Tom, I made mention earlier that I think the genius, the magic, the most precious thing about our society from its inception has been that government was the servant of the people, not the master of the people. It is not, I think it's a mistake ever to let it become the center of events. I said earlier, and I guess this is my simplest answer to your question, that government should see its role, and when it performs its role well, it is enabling individuals to live out their potential, and for institutions, free institutions, to flourish, businesses, and the Little League, and the churches, and the voluntary associations that Americans are so generous and good about creating. And when government begins to take over those functions or crowd them out, I think it oversteps and makes a very serious mistake. I believe fundamentally in this country we're about freedom, and that's why I'm so fixed on the idea of protecting taxpayers. Every time the government at any level takes a dollar from a taxpayer, it has diminished that person's freedom by $1, otherwise he or she could use it on something of their own choice. So we should never engage in an activity that is not essential to the protection of our freedoms, and when we do, we must be relentless in making sure that we're delivering that service, spending that tax dollar in the most effective possible way.
Mitch, thank you. By prior arrangement, we now move to closing statements. Each of the candidates will be allotted the same amount of time, and Jill Long Thompson, you have the first closing statement.
I actually think I have the last closing statement because Mr. Horning went first.
I will ask for some clarification.
Okay.
That is correct. My apologies. Andy Horning, you have the first closing statement. Thank you.
Well, you've heard lots of disagreements between the Democrats and Republicans for years, and when they agree on things, unfortunately, it's generally they're agreeing to do something against you. And I think all you need to do is look around today. Just look around. You know, I think the people who are running for public office, both of these people to the left of me are fine people. They mean the best. I think most people who go into public service really do have the best intentions. But ideology really does matter. Laws really do matter. And your actions matter more than you think. You know, I just got to tell you that for the longest time, I've heard people telling me things like, I can't waste my vote. I want to vote for you, but I can't waste my vote. What have we been doing the last 100 years but wasting our votes on the same old failures? If you just look to see what people say versus what they do, you know, look to see what the politicians have been promising versus what actually happens. You know, government really, even in the best of intentions, it just doesn't work as advertised. And we should no longer allow this sort of thing to continue, where they make promises that they can't possibly follow through on, no matter how they try. We have allowed government to become this huge monstrosity in our lives that's taking up so much of our sustenance that we really do have to have somebody at some point decide, are we going to go in this direction forever and fail? Because you have to understand, history shows us that failure is an option, and we are headed towards it. And if we want to go in that direction, that's your choice. But if you want to choose what has been proven to work better than anything else ever tried in human history, let's do the constitutions. People fought and died to give those things to us. Being an American is not any guarantee of liberty. As Reagan said, we are never more than one generation away from oppression. We should remember this stuff. Remember what our founders gave and what they fought to give us what we're throwing away right now. This is not a small matter. If you read the Declaration of Independence and understand that some of these men were willing to say, give me liberty or give me death, you know, it's nice.
Thank you, Andy. Mitch Daniels?
I want to thank the organizers, our opponents, most of all the people of Indiana, for the privilege of being your employee for these 4 years, for the authorization you gave back then for a major program of reform and change in our state. Big change has come to Indiana these last 4 years, and the results are encouraging. Within the last few months, we have been found by national authorities to have the most improved state government in America and the most improved state economy in America. We've earned a AAA credit rating for the first time in state history. But sometimes the most important changes are the most basic. And the change from bankruptcy to solvency to fiscal strength looks to be very important this evening. All over America, 2/3 of our sister states are in deficit with serious human consequences. They are slashing education and health care. They are closing parks. They are cutting off road projects. They are letting criminals out of prison early and more. Now, none of these things is happening in Indiana, and we don't intend that they will. If we have to make more tough decisions in order to protect vital services and to protect taxpayers, we have shown we are capable of doing it. And do it we will, because Indiana's comeback must not be reversed, and not even in the context of a very difficult world economy. Within the last few years, we have risen to leadership in fiscal integrity, in business attractiveness, in telecommunications policy, in transportation investment, in property tax reduction and reform. In the years ahead, we must insist on being leaders in educational results and attainment, the affordability of college for our middle class and lower class families, and the new green industries of tomorrow. This is the brighter and more prosperous Indiana we see and seek to leave to our children. We ask our fellow citizens permission to press ahead with a bold program of reform and change that can take us there.
Mitch Daniels, thank you. Jill Long Thompson.
Well, I thank Mr. Horning and Mr. Daniels and the Indiana Debate Commission and Indiana University for hosting this third of a series of 3 debates. I think this is probably one of the most important elections in my lifetime. Now, Governor Daniels would have you believe that the state has been turned around under his governorship, and the facts couldn't be more different from how he presents them. In fact, we've lost 64,000 jobs in Indiana since last year. Hoosiers make 87 cents on the dollar relative to the rest of the country. We have one of the highest home mortgage foreclosure rates in the country and the second highest business bankruptcy rate in the country. He has privatized, and he has taken the money from those privatization contracts and put the money in junk bonds and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, jeopardizing the future of highway construction here in Indiana. We need leadership that will take us in a new direction, in a very different direction, and I am here to provide that leadership. I'm very blessed, very privileged to have grown up here in Indiana, to have been educated here at Indiana University, to have served as the Undersecretary for Rural Development at the United States Department of Agriculture, where I had responsibility for 7,000 employees and an annual budget of about $10 billion. We were successful at creating jobs in some of the most economically stressed counties. I have a plan for getting Indiana back on track. It involves reform of our tax structure to make it fair but also workable for businesses to create good paying jobs of the future. It will bring down healthcare costs by making pooling a real and viable option. It will get our high school graduation rate up and will increase the number of graduates from college. We have so much potential in this state, but we need new leadership. We need change that will take us in the right direction. That's why I'm running for governor. I would be very honored and privileged to have your vote and to serve as governor and to work with you to get this state back on track. Thank you very much.
Jill, thank you. That brings us to a close of this meeting of the candidates for governor. I would like to thank those of you who are in the auditorium here at Indiana University for your very good and decent behavior. Our thanks to President McRobbie and Indiana University for their hospitality, to the great work of our technical crews, people who you cannot see but who made all of this very possible. And I thank the candidates for their good candor and their good spirit and for enduring this kind of a conversational debate. We would also like to thank the Indiana Debate Commission for their historic work in this year's gubernatorial campaign. We thank you for your time and attention across the state of Indiana, and I would urge you to please vote 3 weeks from today. Thank you all very much. Good night from Indiana University, and good luck.